Hello everybody, and welcome to Carrie's Corner. This is the end of the third week, I think it is, and Frog and I are going to continue our reading of The Pushcart War by Jean Merrill, illustrated by Ronnie Solbert, and we're starting at chapter 3. And remember, a pushcart is something that you sell things from. See the flowers on that cart, and it's got wheels, and you pull it along the street. And we're on chapter 3, more about Morris the florist, and a little about Frank the flower and Maxie Hammerman, the pushcart king. At the time of the Pushcart War, Morris the florist had been in the flower line for 43 years. He was a soft-spoken man, and his only claim to fame before the war was that it was impossible to buy a dozen flowers from him. If a customer asked Morris for a dozen tulips or daffodils or mixed snapdragons, Morris always wrapped up 13 flowers. The one extra was at no cost. "So it shouldn't be a small dozen," Morris said. Morris sold his flowers from a pushcart, which he pushed between 6th and 7th Avenues from 14th Street to 23rd Street. He never went above 23rd. It was not that he didn't like it farther uptown, but above 23rd was Frank the flower's territory. Frank the flower and Morris the florist were not close friends before the Pushcart War, but they respected each other. Frank was the first to chip in to help buy Morris a new pushcart after Mac ran him down. Anyone who knew Morris in those days found it hard to imagine him provoking a war. It would be closer to the truth to say that for a long time there had been trouble coming, and that Morris the florist just happened to be standing on the corner of 6th Avenue and 17th Street the afternoon it came. For a long time, New York had been one of the largest cities in the world. New Yorkers had been long proud of their streets being busier and noisier and more crowded than anyone else's. Visitors to New York would say, "It's nice, but it's so crowded." To which New Yorkers would reply cheerfully, "Yes, it's about the most crowded city in the world." And the city had kept on growing. Every year there were more automobiles, more taxis, more buses, more trucks, especially more trucks. By the summer of the Pushcart War, there were more trucks in New York than any place in the world. There were also some 500 pushcarts, though few people had any idea that there were more than 100 or so. Probably only Maxie Hammerman really knew how many pushcarts there were. Maxie knew because Maxie, or Maxie's father, or Maxie's grandfather, had built most of the pushcarts in New York. Maxie had a shop where he built and repaired pushcarts. It was the same shop in which his father and grandfather had started building pushcarts. Maxie Hammerman knew the license number of almost every pushcart licensed to do business in New York. If you said to Maxie, "Morris the florist," Maxie would come right back at you with X105, which was Morris's license number. Also, Maxie was very nice about giving business advice. If a peddler came to Maxie and asked him to build a pushcart for a fresh vegetable line, Maxie would think the matter over, and then he would politely ask the peddler where he planned to push the cart. If the peddler said, "East of Tompkins Square, north to 14th and south to Delancey," Maxie would run over his license list in his head and say, "Already there are 13 carts in the fresh vegetable line in that territory. Maybe you could push some other line." There's another little pushcart at the bottom of that page. Maxie's advice was usually very sound, and he was known to his friends and to the peddlers who bought their carts from him as the Pushcart King. Very few people except Maxie's friends and the pushcart peddlers even knew there was a Pushcart King. Chapter 4, the summer before the war. Certainly there had been trouble coming. Anyone who had any experience of wars would have seen it coming long before the afternoon that Mac ran down Morris the florist. There had been general grumbling. New York had become so crowded with cars and taxis and buses and trucks that traffic was very slow. At first, everyone blamed everyone else. People who drove their own cars grumbled about people who rode in taxis. If there were no taxis, said the automobile owners, there would be room to drive in the streets. Taxi drivers, on the other hand, complained about people who drove their own cars. If private cars were kept off the streets, people could get where they wanted to go in a hurry, the taxi drivers claimed. The bus driver suggested that both the taxis and the private cars should get off the streets, and the people who liked to walk found fault with everything on wheels. But what irritated everyone were the trucks. There were so many of them, and they were so big that they did not have to get out of the way for anyone. Most of the businesses in the city hired trucks to carry their goods from one place to another. To get an idea how many trucks there were on the streets at the time, one may turn to the telephone book for that year. In the classified section, for instance, if one opens to the P listings, a few of the products one will find advertised here are package handler, paint, pajama trimmings, pancake mixes, pants, paper plates, parachutes, park benches, parking meters, parquet flowers, party flowers, paste, patent medicines, and then you keep going down, picnic tables, picture framers, picture postcards, picture windows. Look at all those trucks and look at all those P's on that list. They all need trucks to deliver their goods. Another list of P's. That is a lot of P's. Publications, pulleys, pulpits, pumice, pumps, punch bowls, puppets. There surely cannot be more P's. There are more P's. Purses, push carts, parts, putty, puzzles. One must keep in mind that the products mentioned above are only a few of the things listed under the letter P. Consider too that the phone book lists not only pile drivers, for example, but 43 different firms in the pile driving business, not to mention the 7,234 different firms in the plastics business. Then, if one remembers that each of these 43 firms employed on the average 17.5 trucks a day, one will begin to get an idea of the number of trucks that there must have been in New York just before the Pushcart War. The worst of it was that during the period that more and more trucks had been appearing in the city streets, the trucks had been getting bigger and bigger. The truck drivers had it all figured out. At least that is what Professor Lyman Cumberly of New York University said when he was writing about the Pushcart War some years later. Professor Cumberly's notion was that the truck drivers had gotten together and figured out that in crowded traffic conditions, the only way to get where you wanted to go was to be so big that you didn't have to get out of the way for anybody else. This is known as the large object theory of history. Chapter 5, Wenda Gambling Sees the Danger Signs. It is a matter of historical record that the average truck in New York City at the time of the Pushcart War was so big that no one driving behind it could see around it to check the names of the streets he was passing. Wenda Gambling, a well-known movie star on her way to 96th Street to visit her 90-year-old grandmother, once got stuck behind a gasoline truck. For all her experience in the movies, Wenda was a timid driver and afraid the truck would explode if she tried to pass it. It had a big red danger sign painted all over it, Wenda recalls. Since Wenda did not dare pass the truck, and since she could not see any street signs, she not only went past 96th Street, but was at Bear Mountain, some 50 miles beyond the city limits before she had any idea where she was. By then, of course, she was so frightened that she had to spend the night in a log cabin in Harriman State Park. A search party did not find her until 6:30 the following morning. She had not had anything to eat but dry oatmeal that someone had left in the cabin. This kind of thing kept happening. Wenda's case is remembered because Wenda's activities were always reported in the headlines, but other people ran into similar troubles. More and more the truck drivers crowded other drivers to the sides of the streets. They hogged the best parking places, or if there were no parking places and a truck driver felt like having a cup of coffee, he simply stopped his truck in the middle of the street and left it there, blocking the traffic for miles behind him. The heavier the traffic, the ruder the truck drivers became. At busy intersections, they never let anyone else turn first. If anyone tried to, a truck driver had only to gun his engine and kept on coming. Few automobile drivers cared to argue with a 12-ton truck, even when they were in the right. Even the taxi drivers began to lose their confidence. For a long time, the taxis had been considered a match for the trucks because of their daring, speed, and skill. When taxi drivers grew cautious, many people were alarmed. Look at the size of that truck next to that little car. That would be hard to argue with. Okay, everybody, that's what we're going to stop there today, and we're going to start on chapter 6 of the Pushcart War. Have a great weekend. Have fun doing something different than you did this week, maybe. Hope you have some fun things to play and relax and do with your family or your friends via your technology or whatever you use. Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye. Bye.